So sometimes we say yes, and maybe saying no would have been wiser. Sometimes we say no, and maybe yes would have been wiser. Some easy examples. So it was a Thanksgiving Day, and the food was being passed around for the third time. And we said yes, because man, was it amazing. We probably should have said no, and our bodies told us later as we were groaning with our pants unbuckled. Ugh, should have said no. And then maybe later on Thanksgiving, after we had feasted and said yes when we should have said no, someone said, "Hey, do you want to go for a walk?" And we said, "No." And maybe we should have said yes. And then when it comes to this whole sometimes saying yes, sometimes saying no, I'm going to say just two words. And some of you are going to say, "I said a very wise yes." And others are going to say, "I said a very wise no." Two words. Black Friday. Every day, we have a lot of yeses that happen in our lives, and every day we have a lot of no's that happen in our lives. And sometimes we know that we say yes when we should say no, and sometimes we know that we say no when we should say yes. So every day, every day. So if you're married, you say yes wisely to your spouse every day. And you wisely say no to all the thousands of other men, millions of other men and women that you could say yes to. So saying yes to your spouse is just an amazing thing, and saying no to everybody else. There's just a wisdom to that. But every day also there's this aspect of we all know what we should eat. And sometimes we say yes to the things that we eat, and sometimes we say yes to the things that we shouldn't eat when we should have said no, and sometimes we say no to the things that we should eat when we should have said yes. So I gave this message at 8 o'clock and then went to our Common Ground ministry, and there was this, well, let's just say it was a really, really sinful piece of dessert. And I said yes. My mind said, no, he just preached. No, but this is, okay, so sometimes we get yeses right, sometimes we don't. We all know that we should exercise, but every day some of us say no, just kind of our pattern. We just say, no, my health is good enough, and sometimes some of us say yes. When it comes to our attitudes, the attitudes that we have with us right now, sometimes we're saying no to a certain attitude so we can say yes to another attitude. When we're at home, sometimes we say no to a certain attitude and we probably should have said yes. Sometimes we say yes to a certain attitude and probably should have said no. It would have, maybe for some of us, it would have made Thanksgiving dinner just a little bit more enjoyable if some people practice a wiser yes, a wiser no in some of the topics of conversation. When we're driving, there should be some times when we just say no to a certain attitude. Not every other driver on the road is an idiot. And so how do we have an attitude that would be a wiser yes when we're driving? How do we have a better attitude when we're at work, when we would say yes to a good attitude at work and maybe no to a bad attitude at work? So sometimes we say yes and we realize not too long after, oops. Sometimes we say no and not too long after we say oops. And every once in a while someone sings, "Oops, I did it again." So, how do we follow Jesus with less oops and more wisdom? How do we follow Jesus with wiser yeses? How do we follow Jesus with wiser no's? And more than likely, there's a lot of you in this room that you're not going to like this next question. How do we follow Jesus with money? Because every time we do some kind of money transaction, we're saying yes to something, we're saying no to something else. So again, over all the years that we've been here at New Hope, we've got this 4 words, and we won't ever quite get it right, but yet there's a wisdom in trying to follow these 4 words. We say this: more Jesus, less world. How do we say more yeses to Jesus and more no's to the world? How do we at times say no to Jesus because of the yes that we say to the world? So over these 4 Sundays of November, we've been thinking about this idea of tithing. And we've talked about this deal over the last number of Sundays. How do we give a small, thankful, open-handed response to Jesus? How do we say yes to Jesus when it comes to money? A small, open-handed response. Again, we've talked about this. We'll see it today in the little video vignettes that we'll show a little bit later. That God says, here's 100%, and I'm asking for you to trust me giving 10 back. And we'll see why God wants to do that. There's a wisdom behind that. But over and over, we make choices of sometimes we will say, no, I'm not going to do it. And there's lots of other people that join me in not doing that. Yet for some of us, we have been moved to say yes, and we say yes, and we realize over and over that, boy, there's just something freeing and wise about following what God would have for all of us to do as we say we're followers of Jesus. So here's our question for today. Will you tithe? Will you tithe? Some of us say yes, just, yes. And some say, no, I'll give something. I'll give something because, I'm a nice American. I'll give something, but no, I won't tithe. So over this month, we've been looking at this book, God and Money. And again, if you're here for the first time, we'll try to catch up a little bit. So there's these 2 guys, and they were already kind of making 6 figures in their young careers. Again, one of them, I think, worked for ExxonMobil and even went overseas where you'd make, a couple $100,000 a year. But both of these gentlemen that author this book and that, they were followers of Jesus, and they were tithing. They said yes to tithing. So if they were making $100,000 a year, they were given $10,000 a year. If they were making $200,000 a year, they were given $20,000 a year in their tithe. But then they decided that they wanted to kind of maybe see if they can get up to the next level. So they enrolled in Harvard in the MBA program. And so they ended up experiencing what we might call some unexpected God bumps. They just kind of thought they would make more money and they would tithe more of that money and stuff, but some things happen, and this is what they write about in the book. They come up with 7 core principles of wealth and giving, and they didn't discover anything new. These are just 7 core principles of wealth and giving that have been true since day 1 of creation. And so these 7 core principles of biblical wealth and giving, they just kind of remind us, and there's a couple little insights, and I just enjoyed reading the book and being challenged by the book to how do I give and what kind of attitude can I give even more joyfully. So again, as you hear these 7 core principles of biblical wealth and giving, they're just going to ring true. Whether you say yes to them or no to them, they're just true. So, first principle, everything we own actually belongs to God, everything. And that's just true. We all know it. Again, yesterday I was home and doing some things and I had the TV on, and I went to the History Channel, and they had this fascinating program. In the early 1900s, there were these huge titans of industry, J.P. Morgan, Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, and Henry Ford. And they were saying that here's these hugely wealthy men, or Henry Ford was becoming more wealthy. These other ones had already been wealthy. They were talking about J.P. Morgan. He was the one that was kind of the financier and raised all kinds of money to do the Panama Canal. But again, he was benefited because of all the steel that was used. They were talking about early in the 1900s, John D. Rockefeller and Standard Oil was sued because of the monopoly thing, and finally was broken up. But all these men, as we know, they're all dead. Didn't matter how much wealth they had. Even they were able, in their later years, many of us know the name Carnegie, not knowing much about him. The reason we know the name Carnegie is because of all the Carnegie libraries around our nation and around the world. He finally gave all his money, and he would challenge his other wealthy compatriots. He challenged Rockefeller, and Rockefeller actually ended up living quite a bit longer. This was on this program of that, and gives away way more money than even what Warren Buffett and Bill Gates are giving away today when you look at the scale on that. But again, everything belongs to God, everything. The second principle is our wealth, quotes, our wealth possessions should be used for God's purposes. And so how do we do that? Do we use any of our wealth for God's purposes, or is it more for my purpose, my purpose, my purpose? Again, we just know, wisdom would say we need to use it for some of God's purposes. Number three, man, do we know this is true? We just know this is true. Wealth is like dynamite with great potential for both good and harm. Again, if you would go back and read some of the biographies of those titans and stuff, you're going to see how sometimes they used their wealth in just horribly abusive ways. Then sometimes how they used their wealth in ways that reason that we're here today. I mean, one of the fascinating things about Henry Ford is that, again, he was sued early on, but he just wanted to make an American car, and a car for all Americans, for the working class. And he raised the wages to $5 a day, which was like double the rate. Again, for us today, it just got, that doesn't, but so the wealth is like dynamite. Great potential for both good and harm. We just know it's true. Again, if you start watching some of the Christmas movies, some of you more likely, my favorite Christmas movie, It's a Wonderful Life. What's It's a Wonderful Life all about? Well, there's old man Potter, right? And how wise is he with all the money he has? And there's George Bailey. Doesn't have a whole lot of money. He's contemplating suicide because of. But how wise, at the end of the movie, is George Bailey. So again, we just know, man, is that true? And then number four, worldly wealth is fleeting. Again, even if you have stacks and stacks of it, heavenly treasure is eternal. Heavenly treasure is eternal. Number five, giving generously to the poor is a moral duty in a fallen world. Again, we sent out almost 500 Christmas shoe boxes last week. And there will be millions of shoe boxes from all kinds of other followers of Jesus, and probably some people that aren't followers of Jesus, but they just want to use some of the excess of their wealth to bless the poor children around the world. And come real close to Christmas Day, just imagine the scene in some of the poorest of poor, where there's no running water, there's no electricity, dirt floors, barely enough food to stay alive, and they open up a shoe box, and the smiles and the joy and the wonder of their hearts. And they know that somewhere in this world, someone loves me, and here's the proof of some of the love of Jesus right here in my hands. Again, it's always hard for us to know and to believe it. We don't feel it. But all the things that you can find online when it comes to, this kind of berich.com or something, we're in the top 4% of the whole world. Top 4% of the whole world. We don't feel rich. Again, how can we use what God has given to us? Giving generously to the poor. Number six, giving should be voluntary. Again, I'm not going to twist your arm. I'm not going to show a bunch of pictures of that. Generous, even sacrificial. How can we want to do that? Cheerful and needs-based. Number seven, giving generously breaks the power of money over us. And only a fool says that money doesn't have power over me. Money has power over us. And so wisely, how can we? So I want to talk about this idea of just some bumps of wisdom, just some bumps of wisdom. That's what happened to these two men. Again, already very smart, already very making lots of money, wanting to have the skills to even make more money. But they started bumping into the wisdom of God even beyond what they were doing. So we just know that all those 7 principles are true. So will we wisely act? So maybe this video vignette will help us to wisely act. The title of it's God and Money, Who Rules Your Heart? Who rules your heart? Let's watch the side screens, please.
Money is a necessary part of our lives. With it, we buy food and clothing, we pay our bills, and we spend it in countless other ways. But when the Bible looks at how we spend our money, it skips right past these spending habits and looks instead at our hearts. In Matthew 6:21, Jesus tells us that our hearts belong to the thing we treasure most. He then warns us that it is not possible to serve both God and money. This is why it is important to take time and reflect on what the top priority in our hearts is. So let's look at 3 questions we can reflect on to ground ourselves in the Bible and really take an honest look at who or what our hearts are serving. First, what does my spending say about what makes me most happy? We all spend our money on whatever we think will bring us the most joy. This means that if our joy is really coming from God, then our spending will show it. But if other things have stolen our heart, we'll find that we have few resources left over for helping the cause of the gospel. Number 2, does my spending suggest I'm collecting for this life? The Bible often reminds us that we should store our treasure in heaven, where it will never be lost. So when we're tempted to collect for a few short decades here, we need to be reminded that only money invested in the kingdom of God will last. And number 3, is my spending explicitly supporting the spread of the gospel? Jesus is coming back, and if we truly believe this, we will do everything we can to see our friends and family come to know Him. We can't buy conversions, but a generous heart can be a powerful example of how our trust is in God and not our money. And oftentimes this kind of generosity can open the door to Christ-centered conversations that we never thought possible. No one is going to be perfect when it comes to managing money, but when God is truly at the center of our hearts, instead of the desire for more money, we will be happier and more generous because our hope is secure in Him.
So reference in that video was made to Jesus' words from Matthew chapter 6, part of the Sermon on the Mount. Verses 19 to 20 and 21, Jesus says these words for us. They were true when He said it. They were true before He said it. They've been true ever since. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. That's just true. You know it. So our hearts be in a place of wisdom, or where our hearts be in a place of foolishness. So one more video vignette based on these same words of Jesus from Matthew 6. So as a pastor for many years, I know that as we consider this information, what I'm preaching about, you have a conversation going on in your head. I just know that. We all have conversations going on in our heads. Some saying, there's just no way I'm going to do this. Some saying, yes, I might do this. But again, one of the conversations that maybe we could get into our heads more and more would be these words of Jesus. And these words are for all of us, and they're doing an impact on me. They're doing an impact on some of you. He wants to do an impact on all of us. And here are the words. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. In just a very, very brief moment, I want to talk about this idea from new to normal. So if you were to start tithing today, and you haven't before, it will be new. It just will be new. If you would tithe for just 30 days, just take a 30-day tithing challenge. Just do it. At the end of those 30 days, you're going to have times during those 30 days where it just felt really, really uncomfortable to do it. Can I really do this? I mean, I've got all these other bills that I am not going to be able to pay. Maybe I won't be able to get something that I thought I really wanted that. But we just do it. It just kind of, there's a pushback against it. There might even have some people around you. It might even be your family. It might even be your spouse saying, no, we're not going to do it. It just feels kind of uncomfortable. But if you keep doing it until it becomes normal, you just don't know what God can do in you. You're sitting among some people that have been tithing for 10 years, for 20 years, for 30 years, for 40 years. If you talk to them, they will tell you they cannot not tithe. Maybe every once in a while they've had to pass on something that they could have bought if they weren't tithing. But they'll tell you over and over again, I'm one of them that can tell you this, I'm so glad that I tithe. And it's normal for me. I don't even think about what it is I could buy with my tithe anymore, because I know what God is doing with what I give. For all of us, we can go from new to normal. So the title of this series has been these words, Father, into your hands. They're from the Bible when Jesus is on the cross, and we read, Jesus called out with a loud voice, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. When he said this, he breathed his last. Father, I trust my death into your hands. If I'm going to take a first breath of resurrected life in 3 days, it has to come from you. This month we've been giving out a tithing challenge. Into your hands, Father. Will you help me open up my hands with what you put in my hands? Again, we live in a culture that says whatever is put in your hands, it's yours. Spend it how you want to. Spend it in what you think is wise ways. But sometimes there's clarity and we know, I know, I've done some foolish things with money. But the more that I do wise things with money, well, the more I know the wonder of who this God is. So I end with this simple question. Well, you tithe. I'm not going to come and check to see if you're doing that or not. I don't have to. We're following a Jesus who said, Father, into your hands. Well, we say, Father, into your hands, here's my tithe. Let's stand, let's pray. We'll sing one more song of amazing faith. So Jesus, will you help us to say some wise yeses to you? Will you help us to say some wise no's to ourselves? Will you help us not to believe the lies that marketers want to sell us? This will make you happy. This will make you happy. This will make you happy. Will you help us, Jesus, to have a joy in trusting you and following you? So, Jesus, none of us are going to live in this world for lots and lots of years. So we know that there are people in this world that live very, very foolishly. And there are people that live very wisely. May we be counted among the wise, not because of some kind of goodness in us, but because of the goodness that comes from you. So Jesus, help us. May we surrender. And as we sing this last song, help us to believe what it is that we are saying we believe in these words as we sing them. We ask and pray it in your name, Jesus. Amen.